Hi everybody. First of all, apologies for not being there in person. I actually have just started a new job and things just didn't fit in with our schedule here. We're very busy, so unfortunately I'm joining you remotely in virtual reality, as it were. So over the last few days I've listened into a few of the talks, and I know some people are a bit sceptical about the rate of change and how fast AI is actually going to affect us. So I think my talk now about fast onset of machine intelligence is a good counterpoint. People have been talking about FOoM for a long time. You've probably heard of doom already. Doom is sort of the negative worst case scenario where the AI ends up not being so great for our health. FOoM it's not really taking sides about whether it's going to be good or bad, but it's saying it's going to be radically different. So an unscheduled intelligence explosion leading to profoundly unforeseen consequences. It's very linked to the concept of the singularity, which you've probably heard of. The best description of the singularity I've ever heard is the singularity is when the progress of the last million years looks insignificant compared to the progress in the next 30 minutes. So that's FOoM. That's what we mean by fast onset. But it's difficult to think about these concepts fast. What do we mean by fast? Well, this slide is a good illustration. It shows how we went from 4 or 5 million years ago of being basically monkeys up until today as we are. And you can see that over that time our skulls actually changed more than our tools changed, which is something that is just completely counterintuitive. I think I first read about this in Sapiens from Yuval Harari, but it really takes some time to consider that biological change to our bodies was happening faster than technological change. Obviously, this is completely reversed these days. It shows how people are not particularly good at thinking about exponential change. So here we have the lily pad in the pond example, and this is like we were 5 million years ago. Things are changing very slowly. Even if we fast forward 10 days, the lily pad is still only taking up a small amount of the pond. So we have to wait and we have to wait, and then after 50 days, finally the lily pad is halfway across the pond. And then after 51 days, that's the surprise. After 51 days, it now covers the whole pond. And we were sort of lulled into a false sense of security. Nothing much seemed to be happening. And then bang, all the change happens right at the end. And that's what we mean by FOoM. That's what we mean by fast onset. So fast onset, but what are we talking about machine intelligence? Well, this is from Wait But Why, a very nice website which explains things in a very logical, sensible way. You can see here the intelligence staircase, starting with ants, chickens, then there's monkeys, then there's us. And we are, quite far up that staircase. But what if the staircase actually goes much higher than we currently can imagine? So IQ is one measure maybe that we can use here. I don't know how you'd measure the IQ of an ant or a chicken, but let's just assume that you can. And here we are right at the top of the organic staircase. John von Neumann had an IQ of 190. Einstein had an IQ of 160. But at the rate of progress at the moment, where things are doubling every 18 months or so, we could easily have something out there with an IQ of 400. And it won't necessarily stop there, it'll just keep on going. So I made these slides a few years ago, actually, back in 2019. And back then I thought we were about the level of a mouse or a rat. We're probably a little bit higher now, maybe all the way up to the level of a human. But this is a slide that shows what we can buy for $1,000. So you can see that for $1,000 we can buy potentially by 2030, one human's worth of cognitive ability, but by 2060, we'll have all of humanity's cognition for $1,000. So again, things go very slowly and then they tend to go very quickly. You've all heard about the concept of black swans, and black swans is the analogy people use to try and describe this type of thing. So let's say that the white swan is what we're familiar with, normal people, every day, in the range of around 100 IQ. So a black swan, in this case, is probably something, like I said earlier, a 400 IQ super genius. But we've seen it doesn't necessarily stop there. So I think black swan in this scenario doesn't really capture quite how disruptive and crazy this whole thing is going to be. We probably need something else. So I'm going with a black unicorn here, something completely off the current charts. So computers already play chess, Go and StarCraft better than us, but black unicorns will play the games of math and physics better than we can. And this has some pretty profound implications. If any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, as Arthur C. Clarke said, then any sufficiently intelligent AI will be indistinguishable from a magician. This super intelligence is going to have a lot of profound unintended consequences. And you can just think about that. If it is accessing physics and math, which is different from what we can easily comprehend, then it will have access to technologies that we can't imagine, which will make it appear as if it's something like a magician to us. So a while ago, all of this stuff was science fiction, which is what I like to do when I'm not doing my day jobs. But now it's pretty mainstream. The Economist is a pretty mainstream publication, and they're already warning that some of our jobs are going to go. Now, I think they're probably even too cautious, but it just goes to show how we move from the fringe to the mainstream pretty quickly. And also, it's why we need to look to science fiction for some of the answers. So I've been writing for nearly 10 years now, and when I started it was a hobby, but what I'm finding is it's actually very useful in my day-to-day work these days because things have come on so far and so fast. So the fact that I've got a pretty good grounding in the science fiction that's been written for the last 1,000 years or so is very useful, both in my writing but also in my day job. And when I say 1,000 years, I'm not exaggerating. So science fiction has been around for a very long time. In 200 AD, so not 2000 AD like the comic, but 200 AD, Lucian of Samosata, he wrote something called The True History, which was about a journey to the moon, encounters with strange creatures, fantastic adventures, and a war between the inhabitants of the moon and the sun. And these days, the next war between planets is probably going to be between Earth and Mars, Elon sitting on the throne there. But still astonishing that somebody so long ago was able to write prescient, forward-looking science fiction that could help us understand more about the world. Kepler wrote Somnium, which is a story about somebody else also being taken up into space. This time they were carried up by a demon, or as we'd call them now, a super intelligent AI, taken to the moon, exploring its landscape and observing the Earth from a lunar perspective. And Kepler wrote this as science fiction, mostly so that he wouldn't get into any more trouble with the church. Because, as you know, back then, the church wasn't super happy about the whole Earth going around the sun thing, and so he wrote it sort of as a satire. This is a common theme for people that we really should pay attention to. Denying the change is a common pattern, and we see it again and again, and possibly we are seeing it now with the very rapid onset of AI. 2001 was a great film. Not everybody realises it was actually about the dangers of telling an AI to lie. So HAL, the ship's computer, was told not to let the crew know what was going on, and this drove him insane, or drove it insane, because if your whatever you've got inside your head doesn't match with what's outside your head, that can lead to problems. And in this case, he ended up slaughtering the whole crew. That's because small pieces of truth fit together with other pieces of truth, but even well-intentioned untruths don't have to fit together at all. And we can see this a bit with the controversy around Google's AI, which they've just released, which has very strong political views. So there's a lesson here. Probably we're better off letting the AIs understand the truth rather than trying to sway them to believe whatever we think is right or wrong. War Games, another interesting film. This one is about a computer that ends up controlling all of the world's nuclear weapons. It's a military computer, and it starts to think for itself, and they can only stop it from doing something drastic and terrible by repeatedly forcing it to play noughts and crosses, tic-tac-toe with itself. And it eventually realizes that any sufficiently advanced player doesn't lose. The most you can do is force a draw. And so the AI learns that the only way to win is not to play. So again, possibly there's some deep lessons there. Then we've got the Matrix, but I think a world controlled by omnipotent intelligences farming us for our psychic energy is probably not something we want to talk too much about today. ChatGPT suggested that I point out how exaggerated all these AI fears were, humorously noting that we're far from robots taking over the world. But I actually am not so sure that we can be confident when we say this anymore. We always used to joke about flying cars not coming, but now we've got things like this, which are a reality rather than just something that somebody's written or is published in a kids magazine. So I think people used to like to joke about flying cars because it made them feel more secure about the rate of change. If they said that flying cars aren't coming, then there's nothing to worry about. So again, quite a strong warning for us, the fact that flying cars now seem to be a thing. This is something else I've noticed. I was actually making the slides for this. I was using ChatGPT, of course, and I asked it to draw me a white and a black swan, and it did. But then I asked it to separate them because I didn't want to use them in that position in the slide, and it just very helpfully told me that to separate the images of the black and white swan, I can download each one individually. Just click on the image and it should be saved to my device. Each swan is in its own file, allowing you to use them separately as needed. Well, that's very nice. But unfortunately, it was a lie. It was just an image, but ChatGPT made up this story. You've probably also heard about the Canadian Airlines company that had to pay the passengers because a chatbot promised them a refund of their flight ticket, even though it was not actually the policy of the company. But the AI chatbot was very happy to make things up, to make the customer happy, and it did. And now, after a court case, the company is being forced to refund that flight. So these AIs do tend to tell lies a little bit, and we have to be careful. Workforce transformation, I'm not actually going to talk about that today because it's what you guys have been speaking about the last few sessions anyway. But I do think that the AI hordes are coming, and we really do need to be prepared. So finishing up, I'd like to talk about the EAC versus DCEL debate, which is something that is just arrived recently onto the scene, and it's actually hotting up and becoming quite a major theme on Twitter, or at least in some parts of Twitter. So DCEL is somebody that likes to slow things down. So DCEL, not incel, that's something very different. And an EAC is an effective accelerationist. That's somebody that would like to speed things up. Effective accelerationism is an approach that embraces technological accelerationism for positive outcomes. This used to be called techno-optimism, or maybe positive futurism, which is how I used to describe my books and how I still do. But EAC is a short term that tends to mean the same thing. And that's compared to a decel, a decelerationist, who's got a more cautious approach to the future and insists we should be slowing down AI and assess the risks, i.e. looking before we leap. Now, if I'm honest, if I was being mature and sensible, I'd probably be more of a decel, but because I'm a science fiction author and because I love this stuff, I tend to get excited about it. So I'm probably an EAC if I had to put myself somewhere on that spectrum. And I think this is important, and the reason I bring it up is because, frankly, forget about left versus right. The politics of the next few decades is going to be about either speeding things up or slowing things down. Can we power out of the nosedive with technology, or do we have to try and slow down and find somewhere soft to land? Climate change is a classic example. We can either decelerate back to something like Bronze Age idealism with small groups of organic farmers, or we can push on with industrialization and automation until we can become a Kardashev level 1 civilization, ideally managing to keep some fragments of biosphere intact outside of the zoos as we go. And if Kardashev 1, then why not Kardashev 2 next? So Kardashev 1 is using all the energy of a planet, Kardashev 2 is using all the energy of a solar system, and Kardashev 3 is the galaxy. At the current rate of change, we'd probably expect Kardashev 1 in a century or so. That's using the energy of a planet. Kardashev 2 maybe in 1,000 years, and Kardashev 3 in a mega year, maybe 1,000,000 years. But that's very old school linear thinking. So FOoM and the EACs would probably like to compress this entire 1,000,000 years of human progress into one hardcore 2-week sprint. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope that gave you a perspective from a science fiction author, maybe a little bit more radical than some of the other talks. I hope you enjoyed it. Very happy to take questions. I'm Toby Weston, science fiction author. You can find my books on Amazon. Thank you very much.